emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 821.2T0223, certificate number 36282. Myers-Briggs.
There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. That such a man would be in the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency. For instance, the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all.
Do you know your Myers-Briggs denotation?
I've never done the test. Like, thanks to the internet, I get the sense that there are like ones that people brag about, like, oh, well, of course I was late. I'm an INTJ.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Right.
But I actually don't. It's 4 categories of 2 options. So there's 16 possibilities.
16 possibilities.
That's worse than D&D. I can't be expected to learn all of those.
Yeah. Do you know what your D&D alignment is?
Oh, sure.
You're lawful good, aren't you?
Lawful good is maybe a little generous. I'm lawful good, lawful neutral. I'm like
lawful neutral.
I'm on the line.
Yeah. I always test it as chaotic good.
Tested. There's actually a test you can take?
For sure. I mean, all of these are subjective tests.
Or do you just mean tested by somebody who had to live with you for 3 years and was like, yeah, you're chaotic good.
Just as everybody always has recognized that I am whatever I am, introverted, whatever, FP or whatever it is. I don't remember what I am. I actually should have
doing a show about
should have done the test in order to firmly establish what I am. But everybody always said, oh, not only are you bipolar, but you're chaotic good. But lately I've felt more and more chaotic neutral, which I think that was based on a thing, an internet meme where it showed 16 different ways of putting away a loaf of bread. Whether you use a twist tie, whether you put it this way or that way. And I read as chaotic neutral. And yeah, I always thought of myself as
I like those where it's like 9 fonts or whatever. And I like those a lot. And I think they really do. They actually all work because they do reinforce my idea that I'm lawful good, lawful neutral-ish.
Well, it's funny about these personality tests that are, I think the internet has popularized. They all became sort of initially popular really in the public sphere in the 1980s, which kind of corresponds to also a period where actual clinical psychologists really tried to debunk them and say they're not reflective or predictive of actual psychology.
Is that what let them become popular? People hearing that they were not accurate.
No, I think they got adopted as part of, as we'll see in this episode, they were absorbed into corporate America's desire to streamline using psychological technology to make people more effective in the workplace.
You can classify the number of parts in your machines, and you can classify the different kinds of income you receive in your books. Why wouldn't you be able to classify your 16 types of employees?
16 types of employees.
And treat them accordingly.
But also there was in the 1980s, just an explosion of pop psychology. And that really started in the 70s. I'm okay, you're okay. And est. But by the 80s, it had disseminated to being something that you would read about in Time magazine, and everybody wanted to know kind of everybody in the white collar sphere of the workplace wanted to know, like, what am I? Who am I? What am I? And the internet just made that into there's only so much stuff you can do on the internet, right?
And that's almost a formatting accident. In magazines, it's reasonably easy to fill out a questionnaire and then grade yourself. But magazines are not, Cosmo is not the right technology delivery for that. Really, a web page is the right delivery for that.
That's right.
Because you can answer 10 questions and immediately get a diagnosis.
In Cosmopolitan, you do a 10-question survey. Is your husband cheating on you? And if he is, what are you supposed to, then what do you do? There needs to be a follow-up article that tells you how to deal with it.
There usually is. Doesn't the magazine then just say you have to put an ice cube down his pants or something?
But it's limited to a paragraph, whereas on the internet, it can send you down a rabbit hole of, 10 ways to know that your cheating husband is secretly in the closet or whatever.
Right, because it'll be designed, the magazine cannot be designed interactively to keep you bound up in the magazine for hours, which is how a lot of the internet is designed.
And the internet is a sorting mechanism, really. And why not, again, just like corporations, why not all sort ourselves into 16 different categories?
Are you saying it's pernicious? Like the more they know about you, the better they can tailor your ads and things?
Oh, no. Although that's probably true because everything is true.
Yeah, at least
now.
It's a side effect of it.
But no, I think it's the effect of personality tests, although clinical psychologists would say that most of them do not actually have any they're not validated by results of, there's no data to validate most of the conclusions of most of the personality tests. And we'll see that there are some that get a lot closer to being using the scientific method. But in terms of the kind of, they're often denigrated as the businessman's astrology.
They're basically horoscopes. And this is also kind of the 80s-ness of it all, with an astrologer on every newspaper and celebrity astrologers on every entertainment show and an astrologer in the White House.
Right.
And there's an effect with horoscopes where no matter what you read about yourself, you nod and think, yeah.
Well, so that is the one of the primary critiques of these this sort of 16 typology. Are you introverted? Are you so forth and so on? Because each one of those 16 is very complimentary of the person that, like no one ever reads
there's not a bad one.
Yeah. There's none that say
you pull the limbs off frogs.
Yeah. You're really a bad person and you ought to stay home. They're all complimentary, but unlike horoscopes, which are just randomly apportioned by your birthday. I mean, there's no self-selecting in horoscopes. You can't say, well, I'm a Virgo, but I really prefer the Leo horoscope. These are very subjective and they're very, they're biased toward your self-idea. And so you answer the questions, and whether or not you're answering the questions like accurately or aspirationally.
It's not like somebody is observing you.
That's right.
Saying, what is actually the truthful answer to this question for Ken?
Yeah.
It's what's my self-perception.
And so of the 16, although the answer is flattering, it does feel tailored to you. And in that way, this is also how fortune telling works.
They talk to you enough that they get a sense of what you might want to hear.
Yeah, they give you these vague generalities of like, well, you seem like a generous person. And you go, I kind of am a generous person. And through that, they work their way toward characterizing you in a way that's flattering and also feels tailored.
It does address, I've said this before, my complaint about horoscopes, which is that it doesn't really suggest a mechanism by which the position of Mars would affect my attitude toward other people or money or whatever it is. Whereas these have the, maybe they're pseudoscience, but they at least have the trappings of data. I have fed my data into the computer by answering these questions. What is the test like?
The test is just a series of sort of yes or no questions. And in Myers-Briggs, you grade it on a strongly yes, middle, pretty much, weak yes, no answer.
A tortoise is crossing a highway. Or, what is it? You're walking through a desert. A tortoise is upside down.
It's nothing quite like that. It's not really trolley problem stuff.
It's not Voight
like
Camp?
I like having my desk organized.
Oh, okay.
Strongly agree, strongly disagree. In the hope that, and this is another one of the main criticisms of Myers-Briggs, is that they're looking for a really bicameral, bipolar division between, for instance,
dichotomies.
They're dichotomies. And you take these tests now kind of all the time. I don't know. Do you shy away from them, or when one falls into your lap, do you take it?
No, I don't take it. I mostly for the reason that I kind of feel like it's like, because so many of them are now bull. So many of them end with, which Sopranos character are you?
Yeah, right. Or log in to see what your new job opportunities.
There is that.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like, if there were one of these in a psychology textbook, I would love to take them. In fact, I remember in the 80s reading up on all these different tests, the MMPI and whatever, right. and just being annoyed that due to copyright and academic reasons, it wasn't easy to get your hand on the test. They had to be administered by a professional. And so I couldn't take them, and it bothered me. But now that they're everywhere, I just think, well, they're all bull. They're like those maps that say what the favorite Halloween candy is in every state.
Well, and that's another way that the internet has popularized this stuff, because although Myers-Briggs, the test itself was trademarked by the Myers-Briggs company, they didn't, and it was a oversight. They didn't actually trademark the theory. And so there are,
like the 4-letter thing.
Well, that, and also, just the 16 types.
I see. So you can rename the 16 types and run your own test.
And there are all kinds of websites that are like the 16 types. So you can take the test over and over, and it's proliferated to, there are so many versions of this now. And one of the great parlor games that we've played around here is to take one of these tests and then have the other people in the room take it for you, and see what you get. Yeah. And it's
they might be more accurate than you would be.
But around this household, we've probably done that a few times, and generally everybody, although the percentages vary, you have a pretty accurate sense of yourself. The problem is that because it's so subjective, there's a bias. And this is something that we've recognized about testing, that it's one of the critiques of the SAT, is that there are biases of, are you a test taker? Like, do you have a verbal acuity? Do you have a language acuity? If you do, you're going to do better on a test that is dependent on synonyms, right? On using language to answer the questions.
And here, maybe what you might get a sense of where the questions, some of the intention behind the individual questions, and so you can lead your answers toward the outcome you might want on some level.
Well, that, and also, there are the people that tend to be feelers who want everybody to be happy, also will answer questions in the kind of, they never will make a definitive, like, I like my desk very clean.
Yeah.
They always answer to the middle. Like, so sure, sort of, like they want not to be definitive, whereas other people will answer way out on the scale, whether or not. And so you get these percentages that are. So I said earlier that Myers-Briggs uses this scale of like strongly agree, strongly disagree, and it doesn't. And this is a criticism of Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is very much like yes or no.
You pick this or that.
So people that are very assertive are going to pick things, are going to be very bipolar, right? They're going to be very dichotomous. They're going to say absolutely yes, absolutely no. I have a tendency when I take these tests to try to be as definitive as possible.
I would like to, but I'm terrible at it. Like I don't know if it's not having a strong sense of self, but I think it's more like, well, I would like my desk to be clean, but in practice, it's often is pretty messy. How do I indicate on this form that I'm that thing about that complex thing about myself?
And I always try to think about the way the system, we're both trying to to intuit the intention,
Right.
and I try to intuit like, okay, well, yes, both things are always true of everyone.
That's why horoscopes work.
Which am I? But what Myers-Briggs does is reduce all that down to there's no bell curve in the test results. You're either an introvert or an extrovert, and one person could be really close to the middle, but whichever small way they lean, they're an introvert, and they're in the same category as somebody that is registers very strongly introverted across the
And that's
spectrum.
the problem with these
One of the problems.
either or.
Yeah.
I assume one of the, I mean, there could be other problems. Like, I assume there's a major philosophical problem about, like, are these really meaningful ways to categorize the human brain, the human mind and personality? But there's also the question of whether the questions chosen really predict the traits they think they're predicting. Like, is there data showing that, a messy desk, for example, correlates to whichever of the polarities they're trying to judge there, or is that just somebody's intuition in the 40s?
Well, it in the tests that have survived, or rather the tests that do have some kind of clinical reliability, there are what they call factors, which are, if you take across a broad spectrum of questions, you do have a tendency, you are able to say, oh, all of these questions are kind of related to an unseen, like a catch-all of that does tie them all together. A messy desk, fastidiousness, and conscientiousness do tend to aggregate.
And that's based on data.
Yeah, that's based on data. And so in the early days of compiling these tests, there were often hundreds and hundreds of questions. And over time, they were reduced and simplified to like, oh, these are all questions that are kind of factors.
These correlate so well that we can streamline the test.
We can streamline the test. And there are, there's data there's Q data, which is the data that you get from questionnaires. And then there's L data, which is data that you can gauge from looking at a person's life.
Like an observer would do this?
Yeah,
does
life
that
history.
happen
It does within a clinical context.
Q data, by the way, is also the kind of Star Trek: The Next Generation fan fiction I write / fiction.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Q data.
If you want to read some of my Q data stories,
He's unpredictable, but pretty sexy in a chaotic neutral way.
It's canon that he is fully functioning.
Is that right?
If you know what I mean.
Oh, I didn't. Well, canon within the Star Trek community, or just within your fanfic?
In my household,
I see.
mostly. No, it's actually on the show specifically. There's surprising amount of discussion of Data's genitals.
a lot of the. I thought you were talking about Q
and Data.
Oh, together, right?
That's
the fanfic.
That's the slash in the slash fic. It's between the Q and the D.
The thing is, if Data
Q wants the D.
If Data was catching and not pitching, it wouldn't matter.
It would not matter. No. Well, I mean, it depends on how he's constructed.
Right. Oh, I guess so.
We don't know. Like, does Data poop? Hard to say.
He might just let off steam.
Out his ears? Poop. He's like the Tin Woodsman.
Psychologists want to collect L data because one of the ways that you would test these tests is to see if they're predictive. If somebody has these qualities, wouldn't those if you could reduce someone to one of 16 types, wouldn't that be represented then in what happens in their life? If you're called the executive by one of these 16 traits, do you become an executive? If you are a sensitive introvert, do you become and so
it's a big part of intelligence testing. Like, these would be legitimate if they could actually predict real world success. But of course, that depends on how we have tied academic achievement to real world success, and it's tricky.
And it gets trickier, right? Because typing people is both.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, but it also trends into sort of fascistic impulses too, right? You want these people over here and those people over there. There's
like a society might decide, because you have these letters, you're better served doing this, and we treat you like that.
Sure, the Japanese model of you take a test in elementary school and that determines the course of your life, and that's true in a lot of education
European
systems,
societies
right?
too. Yeah, like very, very young, it's like, nope, vocational school for you, buddy.
Yeah, you're not going to college. But also, using intelligence tests to segregate communities or to justify mistreatment, maltreatment,
discrimination.
But also, there's a utopian hope that a greater understanding of oneself will enable a more egalitarian society, because people will have this evidence, self-generated evidence that they should be pursuing a certain career path, or they should socialize with certain people.
Life is very confusing and complicated, and often you have to make these decisions when you're at a young age and totally incompetent to do so. I think about, taking my kids on to tour college campuses. Oh yeah. As long as you do this 2-hour tour, you'll be able to make an informed decision about which of the thousands of institutions of higher learnings will serve you well for the rest of your life.
A 2-hour tour where they're only showing you, like, they're handing you the brochure where it's like a rainbow of people,
It's such a crazy system. So yeah, I feel like that's the appeal of this kind of testing. And I say that as somebody who was once in the wrong career, one I was ill-suited to.
Right.
And I would have loved a data-based way to find out about myself that I wasn't going to love some things about it.
Well, so although personality typing and testing goes all the way back to Herodotus, or Plato, right? Like,
were they like, these are the kinds of Greek there be?
Well, if you think about phlegmatic, sclerotic, like
black
sanguine,
bile, all the humors,
right? The humors dominated for 2 centuries, 2 millennia. As
imagine looking at a newspaper back then. I will consult the broadsheet. It's like your horoscope. Black bile.
Black bile.
I will have a lucky encounter by midday.
And those were, that was well understood to be the 4 types, right? Melancholic and
basically it's what? It's just they're kinds of emotional affect, right? There's the sad people and the angry people. It's kind of funny to think about, like, boiling down the complexity of the human mind into such a basic way. Hey, are you one of the sad guys or the angry guys?
Well, and that remains kind of that remains at the core.
That's the critique
of a lot of these personality tests, including the ones that are demonstrably, or data backed. So the 4 humors were, if you have red, if you're sanguine and you have red blood, you're friendly, you're optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
If you have yellow bile, you're bitter and you're quick to anger, but you're also daring and it's
Hogwarts.
The 4 humors were, they thought that you could actually see from the color of someone's skin.
Yeah, I was going to point out that even this very early one has the same kind of seemingly scientific backing that all the 20th century ones.
So the bitter, short-tempered ones have a yellowish cast to their, presumably white skin.
Oh, so they're racist too. That's great.
Yeah. Black bile, they're lazy and fearful, and sickly, and they have black hair and black eyes. So,
very early, there's like a phenotype too.
And then phlegmatic are sort of forgetful and low-spirited, and they have blonde hair or white hair.
This seems crazy to me.
Yeah,
like,
it's not.
Not just the scientific backing for it, but just the idea that if you were to try to separate your friends into 4 categories, that one of them would be forgetful and sickly.
Although, you look at yourself and the thing is that everybody is, one of the innovations is, of course, recognizing that everybody is everything, or in proportions, right?
Right. But, if all your humors were adjusted, you would be exactly a perfect medium of all of them. And if you are more forgetful than the average man, it's because one humor is out of balance.
Right.
Yeah.
So So our modern conception of this really begins, like all of psychology, in the relationship between Freud and Carl Jung. And, Freud was Jung's mentor, and as their ideas in this burgeoning field of analysis and psychology, Freud wanted it to be focused on analysis. Freud had a sense of the libido as being the driving force of the unconscious.
It's sex, basically.
Yeah. Jung wanted to have a broader sense of the mind. He believed in what he called the collective unconscious, which is this, the archetypes of human beings, true across all cultures.
Hard to demonstrate, see if meaning that underlies. He's a bit more of a mystic, right?
Well, so he is both more of a mystic and also denigrated as a mystic.
You think it's unfair?
Well, it's just that all of these initial forays into psychology, it was all an art, a magical art, right? These were not data-based.
Terra incognita.
Yeah, no one's coming to this with the scientific method. It's all anecdotal, and it's also inspirational. But although Jung does believe in the soul, he's also a doctor and a scientist, and working, but most of it is inspired thinking in the field of philosophy rather than in any kind of science,
actual,
clinical. Because
psychology.
How do you start a thing and not have any theory and immediately begin collecting data? You'd have to have a theory to drive it.
That's true.
So Jung has his theories, or theory, is that there are kind of four functions that drive consciousness. Four traits. There's sense, your senses.
Mm-hmm.
There's your intuition, and those are both in the subcategory of your perception. So intuition is a perception along with sense, and they're not dichotomous at this point. And then there's the rational. So that's the kind of irrational side of our consciousness. And then the rational side, the judgment side, you have thinking,
decision making.
Yeah, you have your thinking, and then you have your feelings. And feelings are rational in this.
Interesting.
They're not. It's not.
That's not the dichotomy we use today.
Right. It's not that feelings are. They're a legitimate way of coming to conclusions of judging scenarios.
Because at least maybe you're more aware of them than sense and intuition, I guess. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, and you can judge people based on your feelings. They are connected to reality.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
they're a response to some stimulus.
And sense and intuition is also, but
you're not so aware of the connection, maybe.
And then these are kind of subsumed beneath the really dichotomous introversion and extroversion. And so you can be, and introversion and extroversion are the primary sort of bicameral ways of being. And then within those you have sensing, you can be introverted and use your senses, introverted and use intuition, etc.
I see. So it's which of the four things you kind of fall back on as far as decision making and living your life.
Right. So your four sense functions or making sense of the world functions are modified by whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert. And the dominant pair is how you live your conscious life. And then the oppositional pair is your unconscious.
That seems very speculative.
So this is where Jung is just like, and then also,
obviously the two that you're not emphasizing are
right, because
under the covers.
He recognizes that they're present. All four and both types are represented in all people. So he's trying to.
If they're not coming to the fore, they must be somewhere in the background.
Right. He's trying to make a system out of it. And, Jung and Freud have a falling out. Jung goes in and out of fashion. Eventually, as psychology becomes a field, both of them are recognized as like very important foundational figures, but really their stuff doesn't hold up to rigorous testing. And even now, both are in or out of fashion, depending on what subreddit you're on.
There are still Freudians and Jungians in the field, but they might be cherry-picking ideas and reinterpreting them through the lens of...
You can go through Jungian analysis now, but it's not covered by insurance.
When he says introversion and extroversion is like the big divide of humanity, is he meaning the same thing that we would colloquially mean by that today?
He does, okay. And that's one of the consistent, delimiters. Is that the right word?
Sure. I have no idea how you're going to finish the sentence, but sure.
That persists even into the contemporary ways of analyzing personality that do have science behind it.
That's one I read as a kid that really just intuitively seemed like, yeah, wait, that does explain me. It explains the divisions between different kinds of people I know. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have known that there were people who, were not just more outgoing, but actually, were energized by that in a way that I was energized by not having to do that sometimes.
The introvert-extrovert thing hit me like a ton of bricks in my 30s. A close female friend, at one point, we were having a late-night conversation on a deck in back of a house smoking cigarettes. And I was talking about myself as this extroverted person that knew everyone in town and was a musician and loved to talk and be in the center of attention at parties. And she took a drag on her cigarette and said, "You're the most introverted person I know. Like, I'm a playwright and I know, like profoundly introverted people, and you in your soul are like a deep, deep introvert." And it shook me.
Did you immediately believe this diagnosis? Because she's not a professional, John.
Well,
she's a playwright.
In a way, she had my faith. I already thought of her as a very intelligent person. Her name, by the way, is Kristen Cosmas, and she continues to be a playwright to this day. I highly recommend you look at her work. And
maybe go to her for personality analysis.
Well, she was pretty good at it. But what happened was it resonated. It hit me that, because then she explained, extroverts get energy from interaction with the outside world, and introverts restore their energy by being alone.
Yeah, it's not shyness necessarily.
It's not at all shyness. And I had always thought introversion, that's somebody that's got no social skills, that sits at home and doesn't want, can't make eye contact.
You were thinking of nerds versus jocks, the other great dichotomy of the era. And
as she explained it to me further, I realized that this was at the core of a lot of the ways that I failed, that I felt I failed to be a thriving person in the world, because I had so many extroverted skills. How could I not convert those into the power that extroverts have in the world as mainstream? The world is designed for and by extroverts, right? Introverts, at least traditionally, were less able, because the world happens in interaction, right? And realizing that, all the things that I thought of that were things about myself that felt like sicknesses or bad spirits, like
your humors were out of balance,
evil upon me, were just me needing to be alone to recharge, and me being not looking at the world or at human interaction in an extroverted way at all. And all my extroversion was a technique, right? You have it too.
You're an electric car. You're a Nissan Leaf. You serve the world very well out and about town. Zoom, zoom. But you know what?
Have to go home.
You got to go back to your little garage and plug in.
Well, and I never shacked up with anyone. I didn't like roommates. I didn't want to be around people, except when I walked out the door on stage, right? And walking out on stage, I did feel like I was in the performance as long as I was out.
Think how different it would be if on that deck she'd said, "Oh no, you're just a narcissistic misanthrope."
Yeah, right. It would have been like,
you love attention but not human connection.
Oh, thank you.
You'd be like, what?
No, that's what I thought I was, a narcissistic misanthrope. and realizing that no, in fact, I was this other thing. And so it became a way that I described myself and defined myself for a long time. And then over time realized, wait a minute, I cannot look at myself this dichotomously, right? I'm more complicated than that.
You contain multitudes.
Ken, Christmas is upon us. No. Halloween is upon us. And it's time to start thinking of Halloween gifts and Thanksgiving gifts for the people closest to you.
Are those the big gift-giving occasions in your household? Halloween and Thanksgiving?
My daughter yesterday said that Halloween was her favorite holiday, even over her birthday, which has always been top of the pile.
Does she know her birthday is not a holiday?
She doesn't, no, and I'm not going to be the one that tells her. But Halloween, she said it combines my two favorite things, candy and costumes.
No gifts.
No gifts.
As a kid, I loved getting a stocking full of candy on Christmas, but that was just like an asterisk compared to a bunch of toys.
Massive bag of candy, though, that you get at Halloween.
It is a big bag.
I mean, her comment might be kind of casting a little shade on the Christmas present she gets, but that's dumb. She gets great Christmas presents. The point is that when you get to be an adult, you don't really get to avail yourself or yourselves of a giant bag of candy. And your Christmas presents kind of drop off in quality, right? You start getting pocket flashlights and,
it's more like, what do you even get
cards.
Someone that age?
But what you can get for yourself and for your loved ones are omnibus t-shirts. Omnibus t-shirts are basically a way of signaling to the rest of the world that you are a cut above. A
person of taste, not just in podcasting, but in fashion, because these are good-looking shirts. Have you seen the two latest ones?
Describe the shirts to me and use your most florid language. You're not really a describer, are you?
I'm not really going to do some Tim Gunn thing here.
It's got two sleeves and it's made of cotton.
They are the original designs from
back in the day,
earlier in the year, or even I can't remember, last calendar year. The omnibus logo in kind of omnibus shelter, Fallout shelter yellow,
and yet
this is a twist on it. It's a sparkly gold that is very glam.
That is glam.
Cool.
I was always shy about wearing sparkle t-shirts until I got one, and then all I want is sparkle t-shirts now. And
I don't think they're the kind where the glitter gets everywhere. Although, I don't want to face a bunch of lawsuits if your glitter gets everywhere.
Right.
The other one is says Futurelings with
that's the one you designed.
Yeah, I drew some various kinds of Futurelings, a tentacle and a robot hand and a lobster claw. And this one is that design but glow in the dark.
The shirt glows in the dark.
If you have been looking for something to make you stand out on Pirates of the Caribbean, or during
on the dance floor,
or during a blackout, or in the club.
In the club, right?
Really, all those places. What could be more appropriate than a slightly nerdy podcast by middle-aged men? Maybe don't wear it to an astronomy telescope group. If you're at like a dark sky event, in southern Utah or some isle off Scotland, it might actually be fine. It's going to glow just enough that it's funny, but not enough to mess with the retina of your fellow astronomers. You just put a sweater on. The thing about those glow in the dark shirts is they need some exposure to light. Yeah. So hide them in your closet before you get to the dark sky observation event. Oh, I thought you were making a comment that nerds wouldn't see the sun. You would never go outside. Anyway, these shirts are awesome. They're available for a limited time, and we highly suggest that you order one of each for yourself and then for all of the people that you love in your life. Buy one of each size because, this pandemic's been going on for a while. You don't know how much weight you're going to gain or lose. Right. And also, you never know if you're going to get a new significant other and they're going to show up and start stealing your omnibus shirt to wear as a sleep shirt. And you're like, wait a minute, that's mine. And then you should already have one in a smaller or larger size. And that feeling when a favorite t-shirt finally starts getting a hole somewhere near the collar or under the armpit, and suddenly you don't have your favorite t-shirt anymore. So you might want to get 3 to 5 of each. Depending on how punk rock you are. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But do you want an omnibus t-shirt with a big hole? I guess it depends on where it is.
I gave a gift of a band T-shirt to a lady friend of mine recently, and the next time I saw her, she had cut the sleeves off of it and the collar out of it, and I had to confess, made it a cooler shirt.
Yeah, that's on the table. You can get several of these and deface them.
Cut the sleeves off, cut the collar out, and all of a sudden it's like an omnibus, kind of ripped, flash dancey, off the shoulder, cool kid shirt.
But do not remove the tag under penalty of law. If you want to see the new shirts and see that if they strike your fancy or any of the other merch we have available, you can always go to omnibusproject.com/store and enter code omnibus and get absolutely nothing.
This Jungian sort of way of analyzing psychological types, he wrote about in a book that he published initially in German in 1921 called Psychological Types, and then it was translated into English and published as part of his collected works. And, and was sort of popularly disseminated in the United States and was read by one of the protagonists of our story, a woman by the name of Catherine Cook Briggs, who was she was the same age as Jung almost exactly. She was born in January of 1875. Jung was born in July.
Oh, wow. So this is a borderline 19th century story.
Yeah, that's right. And she was a Midwestern woman who was raised in a family that valued education for women at the time. And she had a college degree and married a man by the name of Briggs, who became the director of the Bureau of Standards for the United States in Washington, D.C.
Oh, kind of a weights and measures thing? Yeah,
so, somebody that was very scientifically oriented. And she, through her work, although she had an education, it was, initially she was an Aggie.
That's all there was.
But that's right. And she went into work with children. And in the course of working with children, and this was, again, sort of the fashion of the time, she wanted to test them in order to help them discover their best vocation in life, right? This was the science of psychology at the time, trying to help people know whether they're going to be a soccer coach or a doctor of medicine.
It's good for America. It's good for the workforce. This is a public good.
And in the course of the sort of testing that she was doing on the children that were under her, her auspices.
Her aegis, would you say?
Her aegis,
Did she have auspices and an aegis?
She did. She had them both. And they are both part of a vector that we call sportiness. She came up with 4 categories for children. There were meditative children. There were spontaneous children. There were sociable children, and then children that had a strong executive desire, like our strong executive impulse.
Leaders?
Yeah, leaders and commanders.
Yeah, the forceful kids.
And in the course of her life as a sort of polymath and voracious person, she read the translation of Jung, his psychological types, and she recognized that his template really jibed with her own observations and her own, these 4 categories that she developed. And so she adopted Jung and became his acolyte and, and a proponent of his thinking. And she then really dove into continuing the work, not, authorized, and she wasn't a PhD in psychology, didn't even...
Did they ever meet? Did he ever acknowledge her work?
They corresponded. But she was looking for practical applications of it. It was less...
That's not what he was doing.
Yeah, it was less to her of I think she was engaged in the philosophical aspect of it, but this was an opportunity to really order human beings and see them according to type.
It's applied Jungianism.
Right, applied Jungianism. And she was, a good writer and wrote a couple of articles that got published in the New Republic. In 1926, she published an article called Meet Yourself Using the Personality Paint Box.
It seems so early for Meet Yourself.
Meet
you know?
yourself.
Like that seems like, this could be a 60s era Saturday Evening Post article. The Personality Paint Box.
The Personality Paint Box.
That's great.
Now imagine how electrifying that would be to someone in 1926.
I know.
Who because you'd have to be independently developing a framework to even understand the sentence "meet yourself," right? Like you'd already be like, "Say what now?"
There's one person I can't meet, Ms. Myers, and it's myself.
Myself. Shake hands with oneself.
Or can you?
It's a Fight Club thing. Sit out in the parking lot and punch yourself in the face until you really feel it. And then her second book in 1928 was called Up from Barbarism. So you do. I wish I could show the futurelings the look on your face as I said it.
Well, it just lost the whole self-help thing and became much more of a marching toward prosperity.
Yes. Well, and again, this is the era right after World War I. This is the era right before in its Roaring 20s, right before the Depression, right before Prohibition, right? And anything goes kind of time.
I just love the idea that not reading Jung and knowing his catchphrases would be barbarity.
Up from barbarism.
Sorry, barbarism.
And she was also writing a little bit of erotic fiction, maybe some fanfic involving Jung. I wasn't able to track down any of her erotic manuscripts.
Wait, she really did write erotica?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, she's an interesting person. And it's unfortunate that a lot of the later criticism of Myers-Briggs, and if you read even now, because it's very fashionable right now, because Myers-Briggs is so populist, it's really hip to write a takedown article in Vox or whatever saying Myers-Briggs is baloney. And sadly, even recent articles, I'm talking about in the last year, start off with a paragraph that's like, well, one of the reasons Myers-Briggs is useless is it was just some couple of housewives, that weren't even scientists. And it's sort of like, yeah, okay.
No, I'm a good ally. I'm a good feminist. I will do whatever Myers-Briggs tells me to, John. You don't have to worry about me.
Well, and like calling Catherine Briggs a housewife is,
it's not like there weren't any other great male 19th century thinkers that were kind of amateurs in their
They
field.
all were.
They all were.
That's what science was. So Catherine and her husband only had one child, a daughter by the name of Isabel. And Isabel went to Swarthmore. Isabel was, and I should say, Catherine was homeschooled by her parents, who were both academics, and she homeschooled Isabel. So neither of them had any formal schooling before the day they entered college. And so they were coming from this self-educated place, self-read. I mean, if you think about what she would have been, almost 50 years old when she read Jung for the first time. She's and in 1923, right? She's an exceptional kind of
not a lot
person.
of women her age reading Jung. Probably.
Right. I mean, I'm not currently reading Jung, and I'm her age.
I've had many opportunities that have never read Jung.
Yeah. I read a little in college, but, one of those giant packets where somebody at the copy center copied one or two articles by Jung and you were asked to read it as part of it.
Never even got that far.
Yeah. So Isabel takes up the charge of Catherine's work and begins to flesh out the theory. And she adds a kind of she starts to make this dichotomous, right? Because extroverted and introverted were always in opposition to one another.
Either or.
But sensing and intuiting things then become an either or. Thinking versus feeling. Judging versus perceiving. And it's in putting those four either or questions kind of subsumed, right?
Yeah.
And then
That gives you the grid.
That gives you the 16 grid. Extroverted, introverted is how you direct your energy. Sensing versus intuiting is how you deal with information. Thinking and feeling is how you make decisions. And then the kind of fourth interesting addition is that judging and perceiving is how you interact with the world, right? It's not energy. Extroversion and introversion is what you take from the world. Mm-hmm. And judging and perceiving is how you then take it back out into the world.
Do you have a good enough sense of how these are used in the literature to like explain to me the difference between a judging and a perceiving person? I feel like the layperson can understand thinking and feeling, although I don't know if that's actually realistic, but I don't know if I know what the real life situations are that show that I'm a sensing versus an intuiting person or a judging versus perceiving. Is the idea that the judging person is quicker to judge?
Again, everyone is everything is everything.
Sure.
And it isn't as simple as like, oh, you're very judgmental and you're very perceptive. But within the Myers-Briggs universe, judging is looking for order, is looking for is trying to make an establishment,
impose patterns,
and perceiving is flexible, open-minded.
You're willing to
trying to take things as they come, and so
I'm on board.
And again, it's a dichotomy, right? You're although it is a bell curve, within Myers-Briggs, it's like, well, you're one or the other.
That's a much harder one for me to definitively say. Here's the side I fall on. Because it seems like there's more like...
maybe you should take the test and I should take the test for you. And we'll
I
see
know,
what we get.
That's what the show should have been.
Yeah.
And the sensing versus intuition one is more whether you're going with your gut or you're going on data. This is the decision-making one? Like, is it... I mean, because even... I think we know now that even intuition is coming from stimuli. It's just so automatic as to be unexamined.
Well, sensing is somebody, I guess, in its most reductionist sense, is living in the moment, right? They're taking in through their five senses what they can evaluate. Whereas an intuition is somebody that's looking for patterns over time. It's like you and I when we take the test and are trying to discern
the test.
Yeah. Like the intention of the test, and to know that there would be an intention, to look for the author in the text. Whereas sensing, you're taking the test, right? You're trying to, it's like watching a movie where when I watch a movie, I'm always trying to figure out what the writers are getting at.
Right.
And
I hate that I've gotten to this point where I've seen so many movies where I'm like just aware of like, okay, I'm being manipulated here, so now I know what's coming.
And in doing that, my podcast Friendly Fire with a couple of filmmakers, the late great Friendly Fire, watching movies with somebody that made film, and their interpretation was entirely from the standpoint of what is the director doing, right? What is the camera doing?
Yeah.
And I had none of that language. I was looking at what the writer was doing and whether the actors were accomplishing what the writer intended. So that's intuitive, versus feeling.
Versus sense.
Versus sense.
Thinking and
versus
feeling.
Sense. So
thinking and feeling seems like the tricky one because I think it often gets gendered.
Yeah,
right?
well, and you're either rational or irrational.
I'm a rational, analytical person. I don't need one of these feeling people. And often this is used to say, I don't need these post-Oprah women,
right?
Who can't even back up their opinion.
And that's a lot of the critique of personality tests on the internet uses coded language to kind of dismiss the whole enterprise as something that is, well, I mean, that it's something that happens in Cosmopolitan magazine, and it's not something that it would happen in Popular Science magazine.
I just want that 70s book that tells me like what colors to wear. Like, am I an autumn?
That my mom talks about how that book really helped her in her career.
I was always wearing lime
I
green.
was wearing the wrong color.
and I'm a spring.
So Isabel took her mother's work and built on it, and the two of them actually worked together. And part of what excited them about making this a more universal project was that Isabel had married a guy by the name of Clarence Myers, who just had a very different personality type from the Briggses. And Catherine wanted to figure out like what were his four humors.
It's like Born in marriage counseling.
Yeah, and in discover, and in realizing that the two had very different personality types, then they could better understand one another and have a happier marriage. And in both cases, both women remained married to their husbands until their death. So,
Well, there you go.
yeah, in that sense.
It worked.
So Isabel then, during World War II, became really interested in trying to apply these techniques to soldiers who it was, this is a perfect way.
This is how intelligence testing happened too.
Right.
World War I, World War II, you got a bunch of people all together that you're trying to figure out how to use to the best advantage.
Who goes into the auto pool and who goes into combat.
Yeah.
She wasn't able, although her father worked at the Bureau of Standards, he did have the ability to get her work kind of, it wasn't adopted by the military at the time. But right after the war, she was given access through the George Washington School of Medicine, again, through the auspices of her father.
Did he have an Aegis also? Or did he just have auspices?
He had an auspices. Over the top of his auspices were an Aegis.
I've been working out of a home hospice. Right. I haven't been going into the hospice lately.
I have always only had an Aegis, and I never have any auspices.
I'm imagining an Aegis as a kind of nest where you sit.
Oh, I thought it was a dome that protected me from meteorites.
Oh, yeah. It could have both.
Although that's probably because there was a missile system called
No,
Aegis,
yours is accurate. Aegis is Greek for shield.
Right, shield. There you go.
I think I just thought it was a nest because maybe
You turn your shield over. You hammer your plowshares into swords.
and shields into nests. I think it's because Erie starts with an AE
Oh,
sometimes.
AE, yeah. Anyway, so Isabel was given access to 5,500 incoming freshmen, and that's not all in one class. But she was, over the course of several years at George Washington School of Medicine, she could give these personality tests to incoming freshmen and then monitor their progress in college to see and to refine her test, right? So there's always this sort of job success, career success element to the work.
Which would not have even been questioned back then. Like that's
Right.
That's the proof of the pudding.
Although as psychology evolved as a discipline, and then psychology became less about the mystical and more about the more data driven, this stuff kind of went in and out of fashion. And her work was initially published in 1962, but just in journals, trade journals, not really widely accepted. And in 1975, it then was published in the popular press. And this just really dovetailed with the spirit of the moment, right? 1975.
I understand myself.
Yeah, we're trying to
The
understand
me
ourselves.
generation. Meet yourself.
And it was, it gradually percolated out into the culture. But it was in the 1980s that it started being used in HR departments by what were at the time progressive Fortune 500 companies that were trying to create a better work environment. It's
Make the employees happier.
Yeah, it's the 9-to-5 generation of companies that were like, well, hey, maybe this will help us understand why we have certain toxic work environments where this manager is failing utterly and so forth.
They're worried about morale because that leads to productivity.
Right. And so in a desire to increase productivity, it started to be used not just by Fortune 500 companies, but by government agencies. It went sort of wildfire in a way that even before the internet took it and made it into, populist pop psychology, whatever, magazine article. It was something that people encountered and found revolutionary through a test given by their company.
That's how you want to learn about yourself.
At your company.
Through your corporation that is your boss.
But anecdotally, a lot of people finally understood why their workplace wasn't, and people would actually put their Myers-Briggs 4-letter acronym on the door of their office.
Oh,
like,
interesting.
I'm an INFP. This is how you should interact with
It was
me.
the pronouns of the 80s?
Yeah, like come into my office knowing already that, and the different orientations all have interactions with one another. They're given names.
Just like how Leos and Geminis should not get married or whatever.
That's right. And so if you're this and I'm that, then you can know how.
Do they all have one-word names like I'm the counselor, I'm the consolidator? That's probably less official, but
They do. They
I'm the paladin. I'm the ranger. I'm
a magic user.
Level 8 bard.
So an ENFP has a different interaction with an ISFP than with an ISTP.
Sure. Stands to reason.
Duh. And so that really informed corporate culture. Now, during this period, the academic psychologists were saying, we've run a bunch of studies on Myers-Briggs, and it really isn't predictive of outcomes.
I have a father-in-law who teaches organizational behavior. He's got a PhD. And every time I talk to him about something that I think I know about his science, he will just say, there's actually no evidence for that whatsoever. Like,
And this is the problem with data in psychology.
Data.
What is data?
I did finger quotes.
You did.
Just so you know.
You did. It is incredibly difficult to get reliable data in psychology because if you're doing it, if it's a Q score, if it's Q data, you've got a questionnaire, which is intrinsically, not only are the questions, do they have intrinsic bias, but also you've got people answering, and people are liars, or they're not self-reflective.
Right.
And if you're trying to gauge self-reflectiveness on the basis of asking people whether or not they're self-reflective, right? If you're not self-reflective, how the hell is that data reliable? And also, L data is really hard to come by. How the heck?
What are you counting?
Yeah, what
as
are you
watch
counting?
that man or woman do their thing?
Is it just that this person makes a lot of money? Is it that this person got a lot of blue ribbons? Like, what is it? So psychology is just by definition a science where there are a lot of theories, and then it's really hard to prove.
And there's probably some Heisenberg thing going on now that everybody knows about the Myers-Briggs.
Sure.
And actually adjusts their behavior and outlook accordingly.
And there are a lot of people, I think, and this game where you do the Myers-Briggs for someone else, you see that there is a tendency to answer aspirationally. Well, I'm an organized person.
Yeah.
It's like, are you? I mean, you want to be.
I'd love to be, but
Yeah.
but does that mean my room is messy?
But some of the criticisms really do just resonate at face value. I mean, one of them is that there is nothing on the Myers-Briggs scale to reflect personality disorders. There's no narcissistic,
right? And those things do have diagnostics and seem a little more rigorous for because they have to be,
right? And so, no matter where you fall on this spectrum, it's going to give you a rosy picture of who you are and how you work and who you're going to interact with.
No wrong answers, although you do also have borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so it's not comprehensive.
I'm sure Hitler was an ESFP or whatever.
But because it's not predictive. Oh, and the other thing is it's not reliable, even from person to person.
Like it's not easily repeated.
If you take the test in March and you take it again in November, you may come up with a different answer because people are not so they're not dichotomous.
Yeah.
And you answer these questions and you do what you and I would do. Like, what does this mean? I mean, I kind of have a messy desk, but I also really keep all the spices in my cupboard organized by color. Which am I?
So even if you take the very same questions again, you won't duplicate the judgment.
And so that makes it seem, well, and puts it kind of firmly in the category of pseudoscience according to what we think of as science. And the progression of psychology from being an art to a science wasn't inevitable, right? Psychology could just as easily have remained in the philosophy department. Mm-hmm. It's just we have a desire, once you're on the track of, once you're able to differentiate people by what might be repeatable or testable qualities, then you want that to be a thing that you can put in a box and attach an electrode to somebody's earlobes and tell what kind of person they are.
Sure. We're talking to future people who can just put a little Black Mirror chip on their forehead and it'll just say INTP or whatever.
But where the professional psychology crew falls now is that there are what are described as the big 5 personality traits.
And are these also either ors?
No.
Oh, interesting.
They're a continuum, and thought of as continuum. There still is extroversion and introversion, now recognized as a continuum. But in the case of somebody like me, it isn't a continuum. Both things are true. You know, if you ask...
You're Schrodinger's extrovert.
If you ask a question like, or if the question is, I walk into a room and think I'm the center of attention, I absolutely do think that. But then you ask the question, do you need to go home and recharge for 24 hours without talking to anybody? Absolutely true.
So your results come back in the middle of the thing, but actually you have the strong traits of an introvert and the strong traits of an extrovert.
Right.
You just want to be everything. You just want to be Ron Swanson on that test.
I want to be everyone all the time. And the big 5 you can think of, the acronym is OCEAN.
I'm writing this down.
Or CANOE, depending on which way you want to order them. If we do OCEAN, there's openness, which is kind of again like a sensing versus what were we calling that before?
That's judging versus perception. Is that right? Or is that sense versus intuition?
Thinking versus feeling.
Oh, is that thinking versus feeling?
This just points out, like,
we can't even tell which correlates to which one.
How much it's hard to speak knowledgeably about it. But openness, which is the dichotomy there is, are you inventive or are you consistent? Right? Are you open
Interesting.
to
it's almost like the results of the effect of change in your life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Do you assimilate change, or do you prefer consistency?
Are you a fixed point in a changing age?
The C is conscientiousness. Are you efficient or are you extravagant?
Ah, okay.
Then extroversion, introversion. And then agreeableness. Are you a friendly person or a critical person? And then finally, and this is the one that was absent from all the other versions of this, that seemed to be the kind of crystallizing or defining new addition that makes it now more like legitimately practical,
more accurate and predictive,
is neuroticism.
Like, how well adjusted are you?
Well, and how nervous and anxious are you? Yeah. Are you somebody that just has a positive outlook and feels like everything's going to work out, or are you neurotic? And neurotic being like a very knowable thing about a person, and at the level almost of introversion or extroversion, like whether or not you are conscientious maybe is more difficult to tell than whether or not you're neurotic.
And that one to me is very much like extroversion and introversion. That's one I can actually see. Like I'm kind of stable enough that I just have a hard time understanding the life and times and challenges of my more neurotic friends and relatives and children.
So
these are tough in parenting, I think.
Yeah, but also like,
but insightful. Like
being a parent is revelatory,
Yeah.
right? So this is the taxonomy that now is accepted within, because of course this is all stuff that the clinical psychologists want to engage. These are questions that would be very useful, and it's part of the discipline.
Some of these appear to have good and bad answers, unlike the Myers-Briggs. Like presumably a neurotic person would like to be a little more well-adjusted. Presumably an antagonistic person would like to be a little more agreeable, or at least their friends would like them to.
Yeah, and it's and to I think its credit, to its academic credit, it's no longer trying to give you good news about yourself,
no matter what.
Right? It's trying to describe you, and it might do a better job of describing Hitler.
Right. I mean, some of these are things you want to address. I guess the virtue of the Myers-Briggs test, though, is that for decades, at least people were thinking about their personality, as not a, not only something that they would have, implicit was the fact that it's not something you can work on. It's not something you can share with or differ from in others. It's not something you have any, people would just kind of take it as a baked in fact of life that they would not have to examine at all, and a lot of other things go unexamined in that. Your biases, the way you treat others, the way you make decisions, the way others make decisions, and what you think about that. Just thinking about the dimensions of this seems like they would help a lot of people, even if the categories turned out to be arbitrary.
Yeah, unfortunately, right now the zeitgeist is to
swung the other way
of Myers-Briggs, but I think, and to think that Myers and Briggs were two bearded men who were arguing at the University of Pennsylvania.
I was absolutely imagining two men in gray flannel suits, or maybe white lab coats.
But what it really was a mother-daughter team, both sort of polymaths, and they had a utopian hope for this test. And one of the criticisms of Myers-Briggs is that in order to actually take the test, it costs money. Myers-Briggs itself is makes $2 million a year, and
to this day,
yeah. And the way they do is that the people that pay to take the Myers-Briggs are companies. It's still a thing that corporations use, even in spite of all this sort of frothy denunciation of it. Corporations still use it, and that's how the Myers-Briggs company makes its money.
Well, now that Myers and Briggs are dead, I don't care about their heirs and employees. I'll torrent or pirate that test. I don't care.
Interestingly, the company itself prohibits its use in recruitment and job selection for on behalf of companies. They're not able to, they rely on whistleblowers to call attention to it.
So once you work at a place, you could take it, but you're not supposed to give it to applicants.
You're not supposed to give it to applicants, although it does happen all the time.
Huh.
And you're not supposed to be shunted into a particular job because of it. So Myers-Briggs itself acknowledges that it is it's not predictive. It's
come take our just for fun test.
It's loosey-goosey, but
which cocktail are you?
It's meant to help you if you don't become dogmatic about it. You're meant to get this information and have it be a revelation. It's not supposed to be a thing that you hang around your neck. It's not a scarlet letter. And I think a lot of the criticism of it is that it's, like so many things, misapplied in the world. And that was never the intention of the people that developed it.
Well, of course you think that. You're such an INTP. And that concludes Myers-Briggs, entry 821.2T0223, certificate number 36282 in the omnibus. Before we go, in case this is the only one of these records you find in the rubble of civilization, you should know that when social media gets revived after the neutron pulse or whatever, you can find our
doing the neutron dance.
You can find our work archived at Omnibus Project. I was at Ken Jennings. John was at John Roderick. You can find him at his Patreon, among other places. Just put in his name. See what happens.
See what happens.
See
Maybe
what happens. Maybe you'll give him money.
Yeah, maybe
it's still there.
The feds will show up at the door.
What is the currency of your era? Is it psychedelic fungi? Is it giant coins the size of a house with a square hole in them? Whatever it is. I'm sure John would love to have some.
Oh, my great grand orbs will appreciate it very much.
I guess we'll see.
No, I need it now.
Well, that might be tricky. We received email at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. Please send us your Myers-Briggs findings and quibbles. For use in our addenda show, we now do a monthly addenda show for our Patreon subscribers.
Super duper great.
Check out patreon.com/omnibusproject and see the kind of intense omnibus experience the intense and immersive omnibus experience you have been missing as a casual and frankly tight-fisted listener. For just $5 a month, you can hear the addenda show. At higher levels, listeners are able to choose topics for shows. In fact, this Myers-Briggs show was suggested by Gus. Thank you, Gus.
Thanks, Gus. Super fun.
It was a great idea. I like, we often get a lot of history suggestions for shows because that's kind of that's the bread and butter of Omnibus. But I kind of like the idea that we're covering a whole corpus of how humans think and interact. And
I think that's our intention.
Gus also, I think, the suggestions often come from their knowledge of us, even though they have not given us any personality indicator tests. For example, Gus also thought we could do a full show on the Jesuits.
Right. Or I have a long history with them, but I couldn't pick which genocide to really zoom in on.
Wow. Or, he knows you like, I guess Gus and you both enjoy 80s and 90s military aircraft. So he had an Air Force idea for a show. So I think it's actually good that it makes the suggestions very sensible when they reflect the show's previous aesthetic and biases.
Yeah. I almost picked both of those topics and this is one where Gus may get a twofer.
You get a little bonus someday when you're lazy about picking a topic, when the inspiration gods are not there.
You know what? I do know a lot about the Jesuits.
You could send us physical artifacts in our day to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. I have here a few such artifacts. Here's a note from Matt, who is a scoutmaster. He enjoyed the show about the history of scouting and the siege of Mafeking. Where's he from? Oh, he's from Sandy, Utah, but he's not a Latter-day Saint. So he was well aware of the dichotomy we talked about between the Mormon scouts who pretty much had to do it, and the scouts of other faiths who actually loved it, and the implications thereof. But he says he's consumed enough Omnibus, Friendly Fire, and Roderick on the Line to be a character witness for you. So by the power vested in him by BSA scouts, he would like to reinstate your Toten chip.
No! He sent me a Toten chip?
It's signed by him, a scout leader, so that's legitimate.
Wow! Oh, man. It's been 40 years.
You have not been able to tote anything with legitimacy in 40 years, and you can begin toten once again.
Wow, 40 years later. And I have to sign the back here. It says the scout symbol, or scout signature. I have read and understand wood tools use. I can demonstrate proper handling, care, and use of a pocket knife and axe. I will use knife, axe, and saw as tools, not playthings. That's where I fell afoul.
Well, that's what Matt says. He says if he ever sees you throwing a hatchet, he will not hesitate to strip your accreditation.
Yeah, and only when I'm willing to give them my full attention. Again, I was busted.
Did the chip used to be an actual chip of some kind? Because this is a business card. This is something you put in your wallet.
No, it was a card. It
was always a card?
Yeah, although it didn't have this cool font. I will not cut standing trees or shrubs without specific permission, and I have violated that rule two times in my life.
Well, I see. Don't you routinely go into your backyard and?
Well, now I do in my own backyard, but I have specific permission
from you.
I'm the landlord. But I have cut down 2 trees in my life wantonly, and in both cases I regretted it.
You're a murderer.
I immediately regretted it because I did murder these trees unnecessarily.
I feel like that's how you lost your first Toten chip, and Matt should be aware of this.
Yeah, well, but I have my Toten chip back. Matt, I couldn't be happier. Thank you so much.
We also got 2 cool artifacts from Lee, this is very cool. He's a theatrical lighting designer, and he's a director of theater at a academic institution you would have heard of.
Excellent.
I don't want to.
He doesn't want to mention.
Well, I don't know how much I should dox people on this show.
I see.
Would he mind if I said where he was the director of theater? He sent.
I bet he's into it.
Speaking of Q data / fiction, he sent me an old gold key Star Trek comic
That's hot.
with a very cool cover. For some reason, it has.
March 1976.
For some reason, it has a Roman chariot, Scotty firing a phaser at some kind of a
Herpes virus?
19th century gunfighter. Yeah,
Oh.
and then there's a glowing giant virus, and then there's a.
Is that the General Lee? No,
what-
that's an
It's what is that?
It's an AMX, an American Motors hot rod from the 1970s.
I've watched a lot of Star Trek, and I've never seen a single AMC car.
I mean, the AMX is kind of that's a kind of a weird thing to put on the cover of that, but it was 1976.
It's hard to explain. Well, it almost makes me want to read it to see what the gremlin or whatever. Oh, it's a time travel.
Whoa!
story.
You took it out of the sleeve. Are you crazy?
It's because I love the smell of acidy paper decomposing.
Does it have an ad for sea monkeys?
It's got my favorite kind of ad, even better than Sea Monkey's ad. Do you know these old Hostess ads where some crime will be happening, but then
A Twinkie will appear.
yeah, exactly. Spider-Man or the Flash will offer the ne'er-do-well a ding-dong or something,
that's nice.
and he'll stop. This one is not a superhero one. It's Coyote and the Roadrunner. And
Does the Roadrunner give the Coyote a ding dong?
it's very confusing. You are not going to believe the third act here. The Coyote is doing his usual to the Roadrunner and the Roadrunner's family, interestingly. Suddenly, Daffy Duck runs up, gives the Coyote a Twinkie, and stops the attack.
Wow. Thanks, Daffy. I didn't know that Daffy...
Speaking of canon...
Did Daffy ever appear in the...
Is Daffy in
out
the Southwest? How did he
desert?
get there? Usually he's hanging out with Porky. You get, my friend...
Oh, he gave you the comic and he got me
He
something?
got you a copy of How to Hide Almost Anything. A book of, this is for your new house.
Yeah,
He
to
knows
secret away my
your ingots.
ingots.
He's worried about your OPSEC.
Oh, look at the author of this book, David Krotz.
Look at those glasses. He's hiding something there.
That guy with a cigarette in his author photo. I like David Krotz.
You don't see that a lot anymore.
Sketchy.
Thank you so much, Lee and Matt. Those were lovely. Again, you could send your own contributions to the P.O. Box number I just read, and I'm not going to do it again because I can't be troubled to. Find other Futurelings on Facebook or Discord or elsewhere. Turn your parasocial relationship with us into a real social relationship with other like-minded young people for some clean, wholesome fun.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived, but we hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the On.